behalf of the Storylines and Te Tamakiriki, and thank you for this hosting this lovely function. I'll show you the certificate, which is that, and the Margaret Mahi stamp pack, which we have some. We got some copies of from New Zealand Post when that came out earlier this year. Do you know about that? Yeah. Absolutely beautifully done. There's an essay in there by Kate de Goldie, which is an absolute cracker. It's lovely. I had a little bit of input into it, but it's very precious. And the cheque. So on behalf, I'd like to present this to you as the winner of the 2013 Betty Gilderdale Award. And she also sent her best wishes. She couldn't be here tonight because she's actually just had her 90th birthday. So there we go.
Oh, look, thank you very much. Oh. It's beautiful. You know, Storylines have just changed their logo, and they're selling off their old fleecy jackets with the old logo for $15. And I bought myself one, and then I read that they were going to have the ones that were left over, they were going to give them to charity, which means that the homeless, the derelict, the alcoholics, and I will be wearing the Storylines fleecy vest. But thank you very much, Tessa. That's beautiful. Margaret Mahi stamps are beautiful, and that was a complete surprise. I was a bit worried. Can you hear me down the back? Yoo-hoo, Sheila, can you hear me? Yeah, good. I was a bit worried because I rather thought they might be handing everything out they were handing after the speech, and if it wasn't good enough, they were taking it all back. So I came enormously prepared, and like Tessa, I thought I'd start by talking about Betty Gilderdale. I met Betty Gilderdale at the best of all possible places. It was at Margaret Mahi's 70th birthday bash up in Auckland. It was a very good bash. It was there that Tessa first told me that I was going to be a judge of New Zealand Post Book Awards, and there were several other nice things happened. But I found myself sitting beside a very elegant lady, and she said to me, "Who are you, young man?" "I'm Betty Gilderdale." And for me, it was rather as I was sitting beside God, and I was terribly impressed. It got better. We went into dinner, and the lady threw herself at me and gave me the most enormous kiss, and her husband didn't seem to mind. And it turned out that was Diane Hebley, who is another Bible carrier of New Zealand children's literature, and she liked a review I'd written. So one of the themes of my talk about what it is to be a reviewer is that there's no money in it, but there are other rewards. One of them's getting kissed by ladies when you come along to a meeting like tonight. Anyway, a few days ago I was talking to a bunch of after-school tutors, sciencey, mathy types, and I told them about Betty Gilderdale, and I said, "Oh, she's written a sea change. It's a history of New Zealand children's books, and it's my Bible as a book reviewer." And there wasn't a flicker, you know. And I said, "And she wrote all the Little Yellow Digger books." And boom! "Oh, yeah, I know that. You're reading that. Yeah, well, I read that when I was a kid. Yeah." And away they went. They sprang alive. Instant recognition, and that is the power of children's literature. It occurred to me then that Betty Gilderdale wears a lot of different hats, and I've thought about it a lot since I've been told about this award, after I recovered from the shock of first hearing about it. My wife thought I was having a heart attack when I got the message. Betty Gilderdale's been a key figure in the Children's Literature Association, which you've heard about, which we now know as Storylines, as they came together. She's a founding mother. In her children's literature career, she's had others. In her children's literature career, Betty Gilderdale's been a teacher, a training college lecturer, a researcher, an historian. She's reviewed books in newspapers, magazines, and on the radio. And above all, she carries on her career as a published author, a beloved writer. So when I got this award, I looked up the website to see who else had won it. There are quite a few of them actually in this room. And it began in 1990, as Tessa has told you, and renamed to honour Betty Gilderdale in 2000. And there were 22 people who received it, and I was looking to see if any of them had been book reviewers, and I got two surprises. One was that almost all the people, just like Betty Gilderdale, wore lots of hats. So a lot of them had in fact written book reviews, but they'd done other things as well. And the second surprise was that I knew each of the winners in some way. I had read their books. I had stolen material from their books and used it in my teaching, shamelessly. I had listened to them talking on the radio, like things like that. And so each of these people in some way had connected with something that meant a lot to me. And that's the other great thing about children's literature. There's no money in it, but lots of things are done for the joy of it, and there's some really nice people there. Right, where did I get started on books? I love seeing my grandchildren here, and the fact that when they come in here, they're headed for the shelves. It's one of the great pleasures of my life is going to bookshops and libraries, and I think my children and my grandchildren have caught this. I started young. I could read Chicken Licken before I went to school at Sawyers Bay, and I still treasure the memory of the teacher who let me borrow Winnie the Pooh for the holidays. The Whitcomb Tombs readers were dead boring at school, dull little books. The school journals were more fun, but our teacher used to use them for testing our ability to read aloud, so they made me a bit nervous. The real excitement came with the huge wicker baskets that used to arrive from the National Library. And thank you to all those of you who have worked for the National Library, School Library Service, and have packed those baskets. They were full of treasures like Moomin Troll and Dr. Dolittle. And the only New Zealand book I read in my childhood was by Edith Howes. It was called Silver Island, and I liked it because the houses had red tin roofs and there was long grass and black currants down the bottom of the garden, just like at our place. Sawyers Bay School didn't have a library, so my father took me in on the bus to the Port Chalmers Mechanics Institute and Library. Isn't that a beautiful name? Mechanics Institute, that was a name for a lot of old libraries. It meant the workers could go and borrow books. It was an old wooden building on the corner of Scotia Street in Port Chalmers where the wind lifted the linoleum and the floorboards as you walked across, lifted under your feet. It was quite exciting. Later they moved it down to the town hall on Beach Street, and it was typical of the library in those days, very welcoming. Children only allowed in the children's section from 3:30. You only want to borrow one book at a time and no noise. You were allowed to sit in the big stone windowsills outside waiting until it came to 3:30. They were heated by the sun, very nice, and I was very slim in those days. I could sit between the metal spikes that were supposed to stop people sitting on the big stone windowsills. They had no New Zealand books. They let me use the library ink alone to get something like Jules Verne. The Secret Island arrived as a Victorian 3 volumes. Oh, it's my stick. Sorry about that. It's protesting. Here we are. Grace, you can look after that for me, please. Thank you. The Secret Island arrived as a 3-volume Victorian set, the old 3-deckers. I read all of the Biggles books, and then when I finished them, I went through Captain W.E. John's Gimlet, and then I was desperate, I went through Worrells. If you haven't come across Worrells, she's a woman. But you read everything in those days. I just about read every book in the library. I read all of Mary Grant Bruce's Billabong series. I read the Twins series by Lucy Fitch Perkins. And luckily, when I started high school, I was given a year's membership of Dunedin's private library, the Athenaeum, which is still there. They had the complete Billy Bunter series, and when you finished all those, they had the complete Bessie Bunter series, written by Hilda Richards. I'm just saying that pen name didn't fool anybody. The Dunedin Public Library was there. They had the Children's Library and those terraced houses on Stewart Street. They were in the titles to Close to Home, you probably remember. No? Okay. Trust me, they were. And there was an upstairs and a downstairs, and there were masses of books for young people, including a lot of American titles I'd never seen before. Marvellous. And round the corner was the big brick Carnegie Library, and it was a joy to borrow from. You often bumped into A.H. Reid round there. My only disappointment as a science fiction reader was they only had 3 science fiction authors in those days: Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Brian Aldiss. That is all there were. Later, at University of Otago, I was there so long ago we were still jammed in the clock tower building, and the library had outgrown the main rooms, and we were jammed up into little attic rooms up on the roof, very hot in summer, and they had a splendid cast iron spiral staircase down to the magazine shelves in the lower studroom, which was very exciting. And in the 1960s, the Hocken Library of New Zealand literature, or New Zealand material, was still in the Otago Museum building. I think it's about where the Butterfly House is now, I'm not sure. But in there, our history lecturer, Dr. Gordon Parsonton, used to take our MA class into the stacks So it was a bit like being here. You were in among all the books, but they were historical books and maps and manuscripts and all sorts of things. And it was marvellous, and I developed hay fever. Today, there are drawbacks to every career. I really value our libraries today, especially the marvellous Christchurch Public Libraries, where they've been battling to keep on providing the information services. They've got branches moving from building to building as they knock the buildings down. And it's lovely that the showpiece, the new square, is going to be the Central Library, which gives us great hope for the future. Now, professionally, I got involved with children's books willy-nilly. My actual aim was to be a history teacher. Unfortunately, there are not as many people who want to study history as you would hope. So you get stuck with teaching English and social studies. You follow my drift? Yeah. Good, good. So all that history training is diverted into other areas, but you're still the one who's got the bright judgment and all the careful skills that all us historians have. Pause for laughter, not so. Right. Maybe it's true, I don't know. I spent 40 years as a teacher, and I was lucky. My years of teaching coincided with the golden age, if I can call it that, of New Zealand children's literature. Our English class sets when I was at school, and we all worked with class sets in those days, when I started teaching in 1968, were all British or American stories. And by the time I left teaching in the new millennium, about half the novels, short stories and plays and poems that we were studying in class were coming from within New Zealand. Sometimes it was up to 3/4. Even better, so was much of the recreational reading. There were lots of books around that were New Zealand books, which was marvellous. The golden age started about the same time as I started teaching. There were 3 Graces, 3 skilled writers, all gained international success within a few months with great stories. Margaret Mahy's Lion in the Meadow and her other picture books in 1969, Joy Cowley's The Duck and the Gun, they were triumphs. But for me, teaching at Hillmorton High School, pause here, there are quite a number of people from Hillmorton High School. Big wave, everybody, thank you. Yep, hands down. That's enough of that. Teaching at the best high school in Christchurch, I won't bother naming it. It was Elsie Locke's The Runaway Settlers that gave life to history. It was published in 1965. The Runaway Settlers was about Mrs. Small, who fled from Australia and a brutal husband, and her sons worked for a time for Craycroft Wilson. Now, our school badge was Craycroft Wilson's tiger. Glyn Strange was a student there, he'll remember that. Yes. Yes, he does, yes. And Craycroft Wilson's famous houses, the Mud House and the Stone House, are quite close. And Mrs. Small's grave's over in the churchyard at Governor's Bay. But Elsie Locke brought the whole thing back to life, and you could read bits, and the kids were reading about their own history, the area they were standing on. They could see things, and it all made sense. It was wonderful and exciting. So a steady stream of New Zealand novels, picture books and short stories followed. And in history associated classes, as well as my English teaching, I used Joanna Orwin, who's hiding down the back, and Eve Sutton's great stories about New Zealand's early history. Hillmorton High had a brilliant, oh that's good, page 2 is not there. Go to page 3. A brilliant library because of 2 very able women, Dr. Helen Hogan, who is still writing books, and the late Thelma Easton. Brian Easton, the economist, is famous for being Thelma Easton's son. Thelma Easton is the only school librarian I know who's had a library named after her. And don't tell me if there's another one, Rosalie, I don't want to know. I did my country service at Central Southern College in Winton, and I was given that terrible old job of teacher with library responsibility. And I spent 15 years there, and it made me very aware of what a valuable resource a school library can be. It also made me aware of how difficult it was in rural areas to keep up with new books. Now, the school library service was a boon, and I wrote a history textbook published while I was down there, and the publishing editor was the wonderful Anne Mallinson, and she was absolutely superb, and she gave me a great insight into the role of the publisher, and she herself buzzed off from the firm she was in, set up her own firm, and started publishing the Harry McCleary series. Enough said. Living in Southland, there was an extra bonus. I don't get car sick. So on the long drives north to visit our family in the Holden Kingswood, I would read stories aloud to my 4 daughters. So as they grew up, we worked our way through things like The Wind in the Willows, The Hobbit, and The Never-Ending Story. And a generation later, living here in Christchurch, I found that with my grandchildren, Jack Lazenby's Uncle Trev stories are exactly the right length for reading to grandchildren on a drive between Papanui and St Albans School. Nice work, Jack. He sent me a nice letter last week, actually. In 1986, the Education Department trialled a scheme with full-time trained teacher librarians, can't say it, and I was one of those chosen. They were all highly qualified, experienced teachers in primary and secondary schools. Gwen Gayworth, another great influence, ran the course at the Wellington College of Education, where we were known as the Stunned Mullets. We looked sort of blank. But we survived the course, and I was New Zealand's first full-time trained teacher librarian. What Tessa doesn't realise is that the certificates were given out in alphabetical order. And so A came first, yes. Thank you. 10 seconds I was the only one. I returned to Hillmorton High School in Christchurch, where better. And it was a marvellous teaching experience because the teacher librarian worked with the teachers and the classes in all subjects, in ideal circumstances anyway, using the library as an information centre, guiding resource-based learning, using not just books but all sorts of information sources like magazines and information files, cooperating with teachers. Computers were just coming to schools then, and we began using databases. It was pretty crude looking back, but it was something. It was also the most enjoyable and satisfying teaching I've ever done. Basically, I was teaching kids to locate and use resources rather than just copying out the words. The right book in the right hand at the right time. And in hindsight, this is the perfect training for a book reviewer. It was a great system. The New Zealand Council for Educational Research did a report and they found it was efficient and cost-effective, so of course it was abolished. Hillmorton, I'm proud to say, kept me on at the same job until I took early retirement for health reasons at the turn of the century.